No worries.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, we're good.
Great, thanks.
Is there, on the space issue, were you able to record it to the cloud, Sarah?
Yeah, I was.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, this laptop is turning into a dinosaur, even though it's like.
You need to get Blue Cross to spring for a new one.
Well, I have a Blue Cross one, but it has all these like, you know, all the Blue Cross things, all the
Big Brother things. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, I work at Facebook and I don't have a whole bunch of Big Brother stuff. What?
That's
guys
because
know about stuff, right?
Facebook is just already spying on us. So
Yeah,
like,
right.
the
Okay,
idea
yeah.
that they need an additional layer.
I'm sure my water bottle is like something.
Sarah, I'm guessing you have to deal with a bunch of like HPI as well. That's probably
Right.
why your stuff. Okay, so that's why. Because Facebook's trying to sell your data, and then medical fields are like, you can't look at this data. So it's the difference there.
That is totally the difference.
So I actually think we should get started just for the sake of time.
Good.
You know, I know that this is your Monday evening, and I'm sure everyone's had a long day, so don't want to keep everyone too long. But hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Miller. I am an alumni of Austin Center for Design. I graduated in 2019. And thank you so much for joining us here this evening for our alumni panel and our information session. Just a little bit of kind of housekeeping before we begin to set the stage of who we are and why we're here. So for folks that are newer to our program, our school, Austin Center for Design is an educational nonprofit here in Austin, Texas. If there are folks joining from elsewhere, welcome. And we are a unique school intended to help you develop autonomy through design. That's kind of the main thing that we're hoping to provide our students. And we've been operating here for over a decade and have, you know, kind of small class sizes and are a small intimate program. And you're going to hear a lot more about that from our panelists tonight. And then as far as our one-year intensive, which is what we're going to be focusing on this evening, our one-year intensive is kind of a master's level design program taught by industry-leading practitioners, taught in the evenings and weekends, and aimed at transforming students into high-value creative problem solvers who will go on to lead successful and fulfilling careers in design, social impact, and beyond. Now, I will highlight the master's level. This is a certificate program. Students do not graduate with a degree, but the idea is that after the year that students spend with us, they have a deep understanding of design akin to what you might receive in kind of a master's level program. So I'm not gonna talk too much this evening. I'm gonna leave that to our panelists and we'll move on to that. Jonathan Lewis is going to be moderating this evening, so I'll pass it over to him and then let the panelists introduce themselves. But thank you and welcome for joining. Oh, also, please use the chat. If you have questions, if anything comes up, please chat us in there. Also, if for some reason any glitches come up throughout the evening, you can always email us at admissions@austincenterfordesign.com. And we'll be checking that throughout the evening. But thank you. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Jonathan.
Awesome. And Sarah, when you get a chance, if you could stop sharing so that we could see everyone's lovely faces. Awesome. And I'm going to switch my view to gallery. Amazing. Okay, so welcome everybody. My name is Jonathan Lewis. I'm currently serving as the Managing Director of Austin Center for Design. And I am also a graduate of the Austin Center for Design, I believe 2011 or 12. Gets a little hazy, but super glad that you all are here. I can speak, most of the time today is going to be dedicated to the panelists as well as to you all who are joining and interested in the program. But as a graduate of the school, I can say with confidence that Austin Center for Design is the most transformative thing that has happened to me professionally. my story at a high level is I started off in advertising and hated it and got rejected from business school, rightfully so, and applied to Austin Center for Design because I saw a picture of the founder, John Kolko, and with all his tattoos and piercings, he looked like the edgy person that I thought I wanted to become, and immediately felt like I had found a home. And so since then, I have had just a really fulfilling career in design, impact, and strategy. And I'm currently serving as a senior director at Ascension Healthcare in their innovation practice, where I'm helping essentially transform healthcare through human-centered design. And for those of you all who were part or at least witnessed the pre-panel banter at the beginning of the call, I think that's just a testament to the family that's created through this program. We all, even though I think most of us or most of the folks on this call graduated different years, we all feel lots of warm and fuzzies when we get to hang out with one another. And even though we don't get to catch up with each other as often as probably we'd all like, there's just a lot of affinity and closeness there, which I think is one of the draws of the school. But with that, I will turn it over to our panelists. I will be to give you an idea of the run of show for the next 45 minutes-ish. I have a series of questions that I'll be asking panelists. Panelists, I apologize in advance for cutting you off. I may do a quick, abrupt switcheroo and ping pong it to another panelist just to get everyone's voices heard. And I've asked Sarah, who is now turned her video off and is the AC4D logo, to play bad cop if we start running long, because we definitely want to make time at the end of this call to for all of you. But to kick things off, I would love to turn it over to our panelists and just do a little bit of a round of introductions. And so the question on the table is just, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and the roles that you find yourself in these days. And just we'll go left to right on my screen. So let's start off with you, Willie.
Great, yeah. So my name's Willie Morgan. I was part of the 2012-2013 cohort of Austin Center for Design. My background is in architecture and computer animation from my bachelor's degree, and I kind of found myself at a dead end with that, with what I was looking for. And a friend handed me About Face, which is a book by a man named Alan Cooper, who's a pretty big name in the industry. And that's kind of my first introduction to human-centered design, which I started looking around at schools, and I found AC4D through some friends who had attended there, and kind of just local networking within Austin. And from there, that's kind of where my career took off. I spent a good amount of my time in consulting and have recently transferred into a product role as a design lead, working in service design at a company called Athena Healthcare. What we do is we build healthcare for medical practices so that they can manage their offices better. So we do things like billing to insurance companies. We help with scheduling, and I specifically work on the patient experience as a service designer, looking at what it means to be a patient, what that looks like from an end-to-end experience, and how we can make that better for really all the people that interact with us on a day-to-day basis. We're very much from a patient perspective, like a back-end company. We're not like seen very much. People really don't know we exist. They know Dr. Johnson's website exists. And we kind of work to keep that running. And so, yeah, my kind of day-to-day life right now is really looking at what it means to be a patient in the healthcare experience in the US, and where we can look at the gaps that exist and make those better based on the system that we are running within. So
Awesome. Thanks, Willie. And I'll go ahead and popcorn it to Anna. And Willie, I'm really glad you did this. Instead of going background in addition to your role, at roles that you find yourself in today, if you could also kind of give a little bit of the story of sort of why AC4D, I think that would make things doubly efficient. So popcorn to you, Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Krejci, class of 2014. I came to AC4D through the initial career path of studio art. I have a 3-year master's degree in studio art from the University of Texas. I taught photography for 6 years after that at UT in a small school here in Austin called St. Edward's, which I really enjoyed, but I kind of hit the, I guess, the satisfaction level plateaued, and I wanted to work more collaboratively with people and at a larger scale. I was lucky enough to know some alumni of AC4D, and I kept running into them and I kept hearing about it. And I don't even think I really knew what the kind of like career outcome possibilities were at the time. I just knew that I wanted to learn what they were talking about, and I wanted to have the experience they were talking about. And the experience for me, like, fully brought me to my knees in the best way possible. It very much put my 3-year master's degree to shame. I mean, I think educationally, I had always struggled with trying to understand why I was being asked to do something. And I hated that I most of the time didn't see the point. And at AC4D, that was totally flipped on its head. And I cared about being successful in what I was learning in a way that I never had before. And that has continued into my career. I'm now 7 years in. I was at a small consultancy here in Austin for a long time. I was hired by Jonathan Lewis 2 weeks after I graduated from AC4D. You'll probably hear many times tonight about how kind of faithful the alumni network is at AC4D, and it just will kind of continue to ring true. And that was so much fun that I cried when he left, but I still stayed for a while. And so now I'm at Facebook. I'm a UX research lead. I'm working on internal products, and big picture, I'm working on the future of work. It's a really interesting time to be kind of digging into internal tools, and also just the kind of spotlight on digital distraction in knowledge workers right now is so loud and important that it feels like pretty like pivotal time to kind of get my hands dirty about something that I've always been really interested in, how we leverage technology to do a better job. And right now it just feels like the opposite is happening. So that's what I'm up to. Cali.
My next. That was Anna. Thank you. That was great. Well, I'm Cali Thompson. I was in Willie's class of 2013. We were the largest class. I think we broke John Colco. We were animals. But I'm the director of service design and design research at Headspace. I'm based in Los Angeles. I live in Santa Monica, and I report to the chief design officer at Headspace. So I work closely with our product design team. I work with our product managers. I work with our tech teams. And I get to work a lot with our behavioral scientists, who are my favorite colleagues because they're like sort of secretly AC4D people. I'm like, everything we learned at AC4D was actually designed for behavior change. We just didn't know it's called behavioral science. And we're not scientists. But I was drawn to AC4D because my next door neighbor, Cheyenne Weaver, was in Jonathan's class, which was 2012. And to be fair, you know, I think the early days of the school were more word of mouth. I think now that's changed, thankfully, because I think we need to attract, you know, people other than people who already know someone who went to AC4D, because it's a great education. But I was inspired by Cheyenne, who went through the 1-year program and emerged with a really incredible and really interesting startup with another person in her cohort. And it was around was called Girls Guild, and it was around teaching young women different skills through apprenticeships and workshops. And it was just fabulous. And it was all based on research. And it was just such a cool idea. It was such a great structure and empowering service in itself. And I was like, that's brilliant. And the fact that she came up with that idea through going through this program and through doing real research with real people made me just very, very interested. So anyway, so I went to AC4D, and then afterwards I worked at Project 202 in Austin, and then Chaotic Moon, which was then acquired by Accenture. So it became Fjord Austin, which is still in Austin. And then I transferred to the San Francisco studio of Fjord and was there for a while before going to Headspace. And so what else are we supposed to answer? Anything else? I think
That was
that's
great.
it, right? Moving
Yeah,
on to
let's
Laura.
popcorn. Yeah.
All right, I'll finish this out. So I graduated class of 2020. So last May in the midst of the pandemic. So from 2019 to 2020, it's a really interesting time to graduate. And what brought me to AC4D, it was a really long road, actually. I had been considering some HCI programs, some graduate schools, making lots of spreadsheets about the cost versus the time. And then I actually used to bike by AC4D all the time, and it was on Chestnut Street. And that was my first awareness, and not necessarily word of mouth, but still very small community. And I started to go to their events whenever they would host kind of Q2 or Q4 presentations or boot camps. And there's just kind of an energy within the community that you just feel like the people are so warm, but also the problems are so unique, and the way that people kind of speak and engage is super energizing for me. And so from then I applied and postponed a few times. I was kind of focused on brand and strategy and social strategy, and then finally sort of hit a block there and was like, all right, I've kind of taken this all I feel like I can. Time to move into design and kind of get into more advanced problems and exploration for me. So did that while also continuing with my job. So I managed to kind of go to AC4D and keep my job at Favor part-time. So I was doing brand strategy at Favor. And then right when I graduated, I started to do a dual role of UX research and brand strategy, and then did that for around 6 months before I was able to fully move into UX research. So I'm still only 1 year out. I'm excited to kind of continue to grow, but at Favor, I work on all of our user groups, so merchant, customer, runner, and internal. It's been really interesting, but yeah, I'll keep it short.
And real quick, Laura, Favor for those of us who don't live in Texas is?
It is a on-demand delivery app that is owned by HEB, which is also the lovely grocery chain and retailer that is very beloved here in Texas. So it's a kind of a smaller organization within a very large organization.
Yeah, for those of you who aren't from Texas, HEB is a multi-billion-dollar grocery store chain that many people from Texas will take a flaming arrow for. And so, yeah, so it's a fascinating brand. So just to jump right in, and I'll be, from the panelists and the questions I sent you, I'll be kind of jumping around. But I think one of the most pressing questions is just over the last 10 years, the number of design programs has skyrocketed, whether that's General Assembly, online boot camps, in-person graduate programs at most universities, supplemental design thinking, social entrepreneurship courses, whether it's through undergrad or attached to an MBA or attached to a public policy degree, to even online hybrid programs that are attached to university. And so I'm kind of curious, just within y'all's own experience, whether it's managing folks from different educational or backgrounds or working alongside them, what do you think makes an AC4D grad uniquely valuable, even in the midst of this proliferation of other things that, at least on the surface, claim to teach the same things? And again, I'll let someone volunteer to go first, because as you all, I'll ping it to Cali 1 second, because as you all know, we have more questions than we have time. Don't feel like you have to answer all of them, but if you want to, by all means. But yeah, Cali, go ahead.
Well, I think it's a great question. I want to specifically address kind of the comparison with General Assembly, because I think I don't have as much experience managing folks who come from other programs, like, maybe a
Yeah,
kind of a tag on to,
MIT.
yeah, like exactly. Well, actually, I guess I have had some of those students, but the point is that having taught a couple classes for General Assembly and having done AC4D, I will say that what is different is when I went through AC4D, I emerged fully confident with the ability to actually do the work. And what unfortunately I've observed in some graduates, not all, who've done General Assembly, is they've learned the kind of general premise or the overview of it, but they haven't necessarily fully internalized it or put it into practice yet. So it makes it a little harder for them to then apply that in a professional environment. And I think that's fine. Like if someone is interested in it in that in the context of just sort of learning it, that's completely valid. But as far as emerging into the world as a confident practitioner, the people that I've seen graduate from AC4D have a much more internalized and very applied understanding of the entire design thinking process. And I think it maps more closely to the way that consultancies like IDEO or Fjord or Frog work, and the way that all the like innovation teams at product companies work. So it actually, AC4D more appropriately positions you to do that kind of work and to really understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. At least in my experience, that's what I've seen.
Can I go next?
Yep.
I think.
And Anna, if you can, I love it that Celine has experience teaching General Assembly. I just want to make sure that the other three responses aren't bashing aren't just about General Assembly. And so
what are you trying to say, Jonathan?
No, sorry, Cali. But just want to make sure we round it out to lots of different educational opportunities and not just GA. Go ahead, Anna.
Yeah, sure. So given that I was a college teacher for a long time, I have always enjoyed looking at students' work and giving them feedback. And as a UX researcher, I also, if somebody asks me for feedback in an authentic way, I always want to give it to them if I have time. So I have looked at a lot of portfolios. And the thing that always stands out is two things. One is AC4D students can tell a story. They can talk about the why behind something, which to you guys right now might not resonate a ton, but in the world of UX, it is an incredibly valuable way because you're always selling your decisions and you're always trying to get people on board with your direction. And that is a huge tool in being able to do that. And the reason that we could do that so well at AC4D is that everyone comes out of it with a solid understanding of how to execute on and make sense of and leverage design research, which is, I think, if I had like a top 3 unique things about AC4D, that one would be number 1 to me. And keep in mind that I am a researcher and I love it deeply. But I've worked with lots of different people, and it's such an advantage to be able to build tacit knowledge on your team, even if you're not leading the research, to understand why it's valuable, to get your hands dirty and understand how to use it. I've just seen it time and time again that people that have that lexicon to grab from are so much more agile and just have stronger work and a stronger story behind it than students that haven't had the opportunity to do that in their education. Or even if they understand the value of it, their ability to actually create a rich story around it is too thin to be useful. That's what I got.
Yeah,
Anybody else?
I think,
go ahead, Willie.
I just kind of like building on that and specifically in that kind of like portfolio thing. What I've seen a lot come out of that is when in a lot of these schools, it's everyone has the exact same portfolio. It's the exact same problem. Everyone's done it the exact same way. They know what a service map is. They know what a persona is. They don't know the stepping stones to get from the ambiguous moment of what are we doing and what is a problem we're solving, to tie that through research to come to a journey map as a document to explain a narrative. It's very much, here's some information and you put the puzzle together, but all that's already mostly laid out in these blocks on this page. And then I'm going to put that in my portfolio and take that to a job interview. So when you get into those critical questions of, well, how did you get here? What's happening in the back end systems? Like, how do all these pieces and puzzles work together? Like I've seen in so many interviews or like in meetings where you're having conversations with these people where they kind of, it almost like, I've watched a number of people kind of fall apart, because that's one of the things that I really got out of AC4D was like understanding every decision is a critical decision within the process and making sure that there's thought and reasoning behind those things. And I think that's something that, like in my own professional experience, I haven't seen come from a lot of the other schools. And two, one of the things that Anna, I guess, touched on a bit, like feedback. I think when we went through AC4D, at least the year, it does change year to year, but we had feedback, I think, in every single class. So in learning to accept that feedback, process it, and then come to the next logical conclusion of how your idea or design needs to grow is not necessarily something that I've seen a lot come out of these other educational systems. And that's something that I think is really important as a designer, because you're going to have to get, especially in UX design, you're getting feedback from dev, you're getting feedback from project management, you're getting feedback from a business analyst, from a social scientist, from all these different people. And you're going to have to be able to take all that information and like distill it down into a very thoughtful idea. And and that's a skill set I think that's like very well taught within the AC4D system.
All right. So I think the next question that I'm curious about is, I'm interested in kind of hearing stories or example of a moment or a situation where you feel like you were, how do I say this? What's an example of a really hard experience that you had at AC4D that took you to sort of like the edge, the wall, the breaking point that has ended up being transformational or extremely shaping for your career? Looking for, not looking for the synthesis, like looking more for the raw, what actually happened, and then kind of why that was particularly impactful. Who wants to go first?
I can go.
Yeah.
Mine's short.
Yeah.
I always joke that like everyone that graduates from AC4D and survives has cried in their car at least once. I am no exception. And that isn't because it's from a caring, it's from like a wanting to be successful genuinely, not like, you know, being punished, kind of. But the one moment that I always look back on that I will remember for my entire life is one thing that I really struggled with coming from an art background, is that the process of making art is entirely up to the artist. It is a framework that you develop for yourself and you just make it happen. And your product is what you make, and it's a result of that process. I really struggled when I came to AC4D to understand that that was what was happening to me when I was trying to make design work. And I would make it to the end of trying to complete an assignment and just would fail miserably. I just couldn't push through that moment and like figure out what was going on. And it was fairly devastating. I felt very unsuccessful. I was like, okay. And John Kolko was one of my teachers, and he and I had a moment where he's a very insightful person. I will say that about a lot of things. And he's a very good teacher about a lot of things. And he said to me, I think that what is happening is that you are taking your art and you are trying to apply it to design. And what happens when you do that is you go, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. And then you're waiting for this like moment of like, where you close your eyes and something happens and you make something. And he's like, that's not how design works though. That's not like how you're not going to make something that has a, that you feel connected with completely through the process. And that's why you're failing at the end. And it was like realizing that I was having that kind of like breakdown of completion was a massive thing for me to understand about the way that I operate in the world. And so I've been able to apply that to many parts of my life. But I don't think I've ever had another moment with anyone that's been able to identify a way that I learn as acutely as that.
Yeah, I think so. For me, it was actually an entire quarter's worth of weekly critiques that I just couldn't. I was struggling so hard. It was like the last quarter, and every week we were coming in producing a pitch deck around our product and idea and the business we had put together, and my partner Mel and I had just come through, and I just felt like every week we were coming in and putting our work in and trying to get it moving along, and then every week it was just like, here's 10,000 more things you didn't think of in making this pitch deck and why you need to go back and spend another 15 hours making it again. So I was like really defeated, and I got to this point where I was like, I never want to make a pitch deck again. I never want to talk about a pitch deck again. I just felt like completely like that was the skill set that I was never going to master. And I realized later on, it was funny, I was, working on something, I was putting a client deck together, and someone was like, wow, you're really good at telling the story and stitching these things together. Like you have a way of like building a narrative that actually like is very powerful. And it kind of hit me, and this was like actually years later, but I was like, that's what they were doing. Like they were building this internal, like it was all of these things that were going to have to go into like it was this foresight that I never would have seen coming. And it's funny because I was on a road trip with one of the people who was the professor for that class, and they asked me this very pointed question, and I got really uncomfortable. But the outcome of that conversation was like, I was so grateful for that, because it made me a better designer. Like it made me better at the thing I wanted to be the best at. And like, I'm never going to be the best designer, but I like that iteration of critique every week really pushed me and gave me really a gift that I use today when I'm telling stories or talking to people in my office. And, it's that the people who are teaching you really want you to see you succeed, and you may not feel that at the time, but there will be a point where it hits you and you're like, that's what that was. So that was, I like pitch decks, man.
And to be fair, Willie, you and Mel were redesigning the way that adoption worked in America. Like you weren't like, oh, we're making a pitch deck about ice cream. Like you were trying
or
to redesign
a new travel app. Yeah.
Right. Like you were trying to redesign something that fundamentally needed a redesign. And so like, I also feel like, it was like something that, of course it was complex, because like literally it's so complex. Like all the paperwork that you all, when you did your research that you uncovered, it was like 400 pages of paperwork that the average adoptive couple had to fill out to bring a new child into their life. And it's like, oh my gosh. So anyway, just to add that context.
Any other formative yet powerful, hard but formative moments?
Yeah, I think for me, the moment that sticks in my head that I also, like you know, will never forget is actually on day 3 of the program. So day 1, you're given a very intense assignment to go out, find, at least for my year, to go out, find a client, kind of secure them, develop a research plan, and then present that research plan to them. And then you then present that presentation to the class. And we had worked so hard, like, I mean, it was just the most intense 3 days that I think I've ever had. I show up with my team. I think we're really proud and excited of the work that we've done, and we kind of felt like we went through the brief, we like went through the motions. We were really excited about our presentation, and we just start kind of sharing it in a really casual tone and kind of finish it out. And then the feedback comes, and it was unlike any other feedback I'd received in my life. From John Kolko. It was extremely pointed and really made me question every aspect of how I spoke, how I stood, the text on my slides, every single word I used on those slides, the story that I told, how fast I spoke, the words that I used. Was literally typing every single word that I spoke, would like say it back to me, the speed at which I spoke. And that level of questioning and of intentionality was something I've never experienced in an educational or work environment. It really made me question everything about myself and the like 10 years of work experience that I had before, but ultimately was such a strong shift for me, and just kind of not going through the motions and not showing up and saying like, okay, I ticked off that box, but was that something that was kind of thought about, and was, do we have a critical conversation about that? Do I kind of understand what questions might come from that? And so that was a really strong stage for the next 10 months to come, and then even on to today.
I have a similar and very brief one to Laura's, which was we were presenting, and John wanted to give us a real world demo of what might happen when you're presenting to a client. So he started acting like a jerk client, and he was interrupting people. He was on his cell phone. He was talking to the people next to him. I mean, it was a live demo of like worst case scenario. You're a design consultant. You're super proud of your work you're presenting, and your client is like, why am I here? What are we doing? What is this about? What are you, So he like live demoed it for us so we could feel a preview of what that would feel like when we moved into our professional careers and we were trying to present to someone who like didn't care about what we were talking about, didn't know what we were had no context. He was sort of being like an executive at like AT&T or something, just like you're presenting to them and they're like, why am I here? Who are these people? What's the project? And it made all of us so nervous, and we were like, oh my God, no one's ever been this disrespectful before. But did I then go into my professional career and have dozens of clients behave like that? Yes, absolutely. And I knew exactly what to do because John showed me how to do it. So I would stand behind those clients. It was like, pre-pandemic. I would walk around the room and stand behind the client who wasn't paying attention and continue giving my presentation standing behind them until they paid attention. And I learned that from that very awkward and very uncomfortable interruption from John Kolko.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things as we speak to a lot of different students or prospective students and then connect them with alumni is they say, I'm a little bit scared. It seems like this is a really hard program. Like this is really hard and really emotionally challenging. And I think they're right. It is extremely hard and it is extremely challenging. And I think the reason is we don't have, to Willie's point earlier, these route assignments or frameworks that if you're a strong X, Y, and Z, you can do well and not have any stress. And if you're not, then maybe you don't. For each individual group, for each individual student, the goalposts are intentionally moved and changed in order to push people to work through the things that are preventing them from being the best creative problem solver they can be. And so, and I think that compared to many other educative frameworks, unfortunately, can be really shocking because most people want like what's what are the requirements for me to get an A? And at the end of the day, the goal is transformation of self, not checking a bunch of boxes to get the grade. Willie, did you, yeah, go ahead.
I kind of just want to add on to that too, because I think one of the things that's been really wonderful and really transformative for me about AC4D is like, I went to public school, I went to like state college, like the education system that I have been brought up in has been very, I felt almost diluted. I was taught to take a test. I wasn't taught to think critically. I was taught to like, this is how you get an A. There's a direct line, there's a direct path. And what I think is really wonderful about ACD is it really transformed the way not only I thought, but approached the world in problem solving, because it wasn't, there was never a direct answer. It wasn't like goalpost to goalpost. It was like, you are driving through the mountains and there's 15 different routes you can take, and you have to make like determine how that works and break down cost of gas and like destruction to your vehicle, and is there a pass, or you know, like you have to think about it in a structure that was never presented to me in a way. So that is, I think, kind of to what you're saying, Jonathan, or at least like what I'm also, what's coming up in me as you're talking about that is like really, it taught me to think about the world in a very different way than I ever had in the past. And I think that's something that when you do that, when you go through a transformation like that, you have to question all these other like pieces. So it's a very, like, growing is not easy, and it takes emotional energy to do that. And when you change in that realm, it's gonna definitely take that to get to the other end. And so I think that's one of the things that maybe you might be alluding to in that, but that's something that I felt along that journey as well.
Go ahead, please.
I was just gonna say, I just think it's a very rare opportunity to get to rewire the way that you approach problem solving as an adult. But it as Willie was saying, there's some definite growing pains to get there, but the pain is because you're growing in a way that is the right direction, say that, or a good direction. This was for me.
Yeah.
But
So
also,
go ahead, please.
I'd also say that like that part of what I appreciate is the lessons and the ability to understand creative problem solving and really solve real problems is so important, because what it allowed me to do is work in any industry. Like you can, I mean, even just, you know, so Willie's working in healthcare, Laura's working at Favor and HEB, Anna's working at Facebook. We've all worked in consultancies. Like there's an ability to adapt that framework of problem solving to any industry. And I think that's the most important thing, is that I felt like I had a depth of understanding because of the design theory and the emphasis on research and the emphasis on practice and actually applying it that AC4D had, that I could then work for Walmart, I could work for Target, I could work for, oh my God, the clients, yeah, and you know, Japanese telecom, like I could do whatever, because I was applying that same framework to all of it, and I knew how to tackle a problem. And like now I'm applying it to mental health and mindfulness. Like it's all over the map, but it's the same fundamental framework, and that was deep enough at AC4D that I was able to use it.
Gotcha. Before we turn it over to some of the group questions, and thank you, Melinda, for posting those. So please do, if, for attendees, please do start posting your questions. The last panelist question is, if you could kind of go back in time and tell your pre-AC4D self like a piece of advice, what would that be? No worries if you have no idea how the hell to answer that question. Don't feel like you have to.
Don't try to have a full-time job and go to AC4D at the same time. I did that. It was not a good idea. Do the program.
Specifically that, because I also did that and it was incredibly difficult. But I think it would be also, I think it would be something to the effect of like, slow down, take your time, and know that nothing you make will be perfect. Like, I think there was a lot of pressure I put on myself to get the A's like I did in like college courses or whatever. I like had to get an A. Part of the journey is in the learning and the mistakes that you'll make and like figuring those things out and why they're important. Like I think for me, my time at AC4D, my failures taught me more than any of my successes. And they brought me to a space of like learning and understanding like the design process and why it's important and why you don't bypass the process and just to, you know, go through that and trust it because it will work for you. I think a lot of times I would jump into a computer rather than work externally and like do the thinking process. So I would that's, yeah, don't work full time and trust the design process that you're there to learn.
So I do to like put my cards on the table as managing director, and I want honest feedback and pushback from the panelists is essentially with that don't work full time. How much of it is just hindsight, realizing how beneficial the program was for you? You realize that like taking a hit from a cash flow perspective pales in comparison to kind of what you would gain on the outset, because I just want to be sensitive to like the privilege of like not being able to work full time. And would you say if you can't afford to not work full time, but desperately want to do this program, that like you shouldn't do it? Like, I guess that's the thing. I just want to make sure we clarify.
No, I mean, I couldn't afford to not work full time, so I worked full time. That was why I was doing it. But I ended up being able to pull my hours down to 30 hours a week at my full-time job so that I could, you know, be there. Because of course the course schedule, because it's evenings and weekends, you technically can work full time. I think for me, I wish that I had given myself more space and permission to do more of my AC4D work. My full-time job was at a nonprofit, so it meant that I also was needing to do a lot. Like I was running events and stuff, so I didn't have as much time as some of my coworkers did who were working like 20 hours a week, or, you know, and anyway, so of course you make it work. And if anyone is, you know, wants to kind of problem solve around how to do it, I volunteer myself to be your assistant to help kind of figure out how you could do both. Because I did do both, but yeah.
Yeah, to that point as well, I could not afford to have done it. Like that's the thing. Like I had to work full time, and unfortunately, my company would not let me do that. It's the reason I say that is it is incredibly difficult. I like it got to the end, and I was like, I don't know how I managed that, and like that's why I say if you can work part-time and do it that way. If you have to work full-time, it's incredibly taxing. I woke up one night photoshopping in my sleep because I was working as a designer and going to school full-time to learn how to be an interaction designer, and I literally woke up in the middle of my sleep photoshopping pictures. So if you can do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a choice either, so I understand that why you would have to do that.
Yeah. If just so we can move on, from most of the alumni that I know that work, they said that was extremely painful. But I think almost all of them would say, some of them would say, I probably should have not done that, and that could have made it work. But I think everybody would say it was still worth it. Would you guys agree with that? Or would you, I guess, selfishly hoping, like, don't say it wasn't, but was it like, Willie, was it worth it?
Yes, and here's the thing: it transformed my life. Like when
kicking you under the
out
table, I'm like kicking you under the table as like, yeah.
No, I would 100% do it over again. Like no questions asked, because it literally changed my life for the better. When I left that, I got a new job within 3 months and was in a completely different space in my life that I never would have reached had I not gone through that process. And I would do it again.
All right.
I just want to make sure we get
Go ahead.
all of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, Laura, I do want to give Laura last word, and then we'll jump to the chat. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay. So I want to add like one positive to working during the program, because I worked both part-time and full-time. So I had about 50% part-time, 50% full-time. And AC4D, it makes you question everything. You like really break down yourself. You start to feel sometimes bad at everything all the time from all the feedback, and you're questioning your whole life. You're like, what am I doing? Who am I? It's a part of like the breaking down so you can rebuild. It was kind of comforting and nice to go to a job that I was comfortable with, that I knew how to do, that I was an expert at. So I could have this time of day where I was not constantly kind of questioning every thought that went through my head. And that was not something that some of my classmates who were not working had. And so it was a way for me to step away, get perspective, and then come back in a way that was refreshing.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Let's go ahead and jump to the questions. Sarah, do you want me to read those, or do you want to do that?
Yeah, I've been kind of like looking through some of them. The last thing I'll say about that is that like just based off of the folks on this call, I think a lot of folks would say that like working full time or working at all is really difficult in the program. But I worked, you heard all of these people that worked. So like, I think if we actually did the math, it's probably like a lot, you know, like we say, a lot of folks would say it's hard, but folks figure it out. So I'll start with a question from Melinda. She's curious to know, you know, what kind of work, this design work, this program prepares you for. She mentions that she's a print designer right now and wants to know if this is a program that someone with a lot of graphic design experience will benefit from. So I'll just
I can jump in and take that one, and then Willie, I think you'd be a good, since that's your background, exactly. But Fjord had a really good metaphor for this, so I'll share that. So design, in the sense that you learn it at AC4D, is designing the entire service. So it isn't just the way that, you know, one printed asset looks, but also how does someone interact with it? Who makes it? Where do they see it? When do they see it? Why do they see it? What is it accomplishing? And the metaphor that Fjord always uses, Fjord's a service design consultancy, is how a coffee shop, you know, there's someone who designs that entire service, and they design, you know, at Starbucks, they design the app that you pre-order on. That's part of the design process. They design when you order on that app. They design who is running those orders to the counter. They design who's standing at the other counter. They design the way the building, you know, is laid out. So what AC4D teaches you is that more holistic system view of design, where like you zoom out a level from designing that, you know, asset of maybe what this one screen looks like or what this one poster looks like. And then you go, okay, now what's the broader context, and what are all the parts and pieces, and how do I want to carefully architect that and choreograph that so that this entire kind of dynamic, you know, living service is something that's really helpful and really, you know, useful and solves problems. So I hope that answers your question. It is, you know, they're both called design. So it's kind of a, yeah, it's different scales and kind of a more systems thinking approach.
Yeah, so my background was essentially in graphic design. I worked as a graphic designer for a marketing company for years before I attended AC4D. And I think Cali did a great job of explaining that, but I learned a completely different style of thinking about design. Like, I was used to color palettes and grids. This is, how do those color palettes and grids expand into a universe like exponentially bigger than what I was looking at? Because design is, again, not just how something looks visually. It's, you know, much more than that. And I think all the things that Cali, you know, spoke to, but I come from a graphic design background essentially. So I've, again, found this program to be incredibly, you know, I lost the word, I lost the bubble, as they say, but beneficial to expanding my knowledge around the design world. So
we're coming right up on time before I want to move into some of the specifics about the upcoming cohort. But just one last question, if anyone could kind of just talk about like what the classes are like, what the like style of teaching is like, and what maybe an average day of a student is like. If anyone wants to field those questions. Sorry to interject, Jonathan. I'll let you take it from here. But
I was most recently in class, I'll take this one. So a typical kind of week is structured in, as Cali mentioned, you have these kind of evening courses. And so we typically had class from 7 to 9:30 at night. So to prepare for that, there's obviously you come to class and you're likely either presenting or actively engaging in the work. And so it's very rare that you come to class and you are watching a slide deck or watching a presentation and not engaging. And so there's a lot of prep work that comes to going to that class. And so depending on if you're working or not, you might spend a lot of that day kind of prepping, and it's depending on the project that you're working on, you might be interviewing users, you might be doing synthesis, you might be meeting with the client. So it's really challenging to say there's no typical day, but there's a lot of kind of prep before you get to that class. A lot of work happens before. And then also similarly on the weekends. So Saturday 9 to 3, that's typically a studio class. There's a kind of a 1 hour break for lunch. Again, these are super hands-on classes. You're constantly presenting, giving feedback, getting feedback, having really close interaction with either the instructor, your classmates, or sometimes we would bring our clients in to engage with us in the actual class. And so there's not really kind of one specific type, but Jonathan, anything else that I missed?
No, I think that's a great great answer. A few additional questions, and we'll get into the housekeeping around the program itself. So Grace asked, would you recommend this program to someone who's already a UX designer? Why or why not?
I think it depends on your level of experience, and you know, as a UX designer, if you've already done design research in the field and you're comfortable with that and you're comfortable ideating based on things you've learned in the field, then you might not need a program like this. But if you're a UX designer in the sense that, you know, you're making kind of screens and things, but you haven't done your own research yet, and you haven't come up with your own ideas and your own kind of services and systems, then I would recommend the program, because I think, you know, for me, it made me aware of the entire end-to-end design process, so that I could actually go from knowing nothing about a topic to building a solution for it in a relatively short time. I thought it was really very helpful.
Yeah, I think it definitely gives you a lot of repetitions in practice. You hear a lot about narrative, and I think as it relates to casting a vision for how you get from present state to future state, there's a lot of softer skills that come from just repetition that you get in a program like this, where you're working under the guidance of master practitioners who have done this many more times than you have. And so in that way, it really is analogous to many different master's programs in design. If you've already gone through one design master's program, and specifically interaction design, design thinking, you can hop on a call to figure out if this would be a good fit, because maybe not. And then one other, so all these questions are great. I do want to give Sarah a little bit of time to go over the pragmatics of the program, and then time permitting before 7, we'll continue ripping through these. The one additional question is about someone who doesn't come from a design background, so any sort of creative visual design background, and that maybe Laura, you, but also me. I had zero art, creative, or design background, and the program was extremely beneficial for me, and I made it through, right? I think everybody, similar to the statements that we made previously about it's hard in different ways for different types of people, given your background and experience and who you are coming into the program. I think it was just hard for me in different ways compared to some folks that came up through more traditional fine arts background. Laura, would you sort of echo? I don't think you had as much of a fine arts background. Would you sort of echo that?
Yeah, and everyone at my classmates, we all played off our different strengths. And so, I didn't have visual design background, but I managed, I learned Sketch, I learned Figma. We do a lot of drawing and things like that. And you kind of get what you need to really work within this program, but also leaning on your classmates to kind of help teach you along the way. So for some that did come from a more explicit design background, to kind of help with that tooling knowledge, or really just kind of small things like that. So definitely doable, and definitely recommended for non-design backgrounds.
All right, Sarah, do we want to cover a brief bit of housekeeping about the upcoming program, and then we can get back to any questions that remain?
Definitely. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for everything that you shared. I know that we're going to kind of make a quick shift right now to talking about some like pretty pragmatic stuff. So I appreciate it. I also know that some folks have to jump. Some of the panelists might have to jump. But yeah, we're going to dive in here, and then keep some of those great questions that you have for some of the attendees that are here. And hopefully this portion can be a little bit more freeform. Like we can just make sure that we get some of these questions answered, and hopefully a lot of them will be answered by some of the things that we're about to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Thank you. Is my screen sharing at this point?
Yep.
Cool. I hate that question, but I just always have to ask it. Okay, cool. So we just talked a good bit about everyone's experience. We have an upcoming cohort. It's going to be in January 2022. And so specifics, like kind of brass tacks, this upcoming cohort is going to be starting January 17th and running through September 16th. I saw one of the questions in the chat was about, is this a one-year program? Is it a 9-month program? What does that actually look like? So classes are actually going to run for 9 months. We do say it's a year-long program simply because I think you have that kind of prep time leading up, and then there is like a little bit of time for job search at the end. But in terms of like class time, the amount of time that you're in the classroom, it is going to be running 9 months, and it kind of always has. The classes run for this program in the evening, so Monday through Thursday, 7 to 9:30 p.m. And then on Saturdays all day. So it's a full day, 9 to 4 on Saturdays. And then something that's, we hear a lot is kind of like, we already touched on this a little bit, the ability to hold a job when you're in the program, and what your time looks when you're outside of the classroom. We say, and we have said, in the past, that this usually is like a 40-hour, at least a week commitment, 40 to 60-hour a week commitment. And that's because when you are not in the classroom, you're kind of putting everything that you learned in class to work. You're going out and you're doing research. You are comping up things, you're making things that you're coming into the classroom to then be able to present, to get critique, to get feedback. And really a lot of that learning happens kind of in your own time outside of the classroom. So that's why we say this is an intensive, kind of full-time program, because you are doing most of your actual, work and learning kind of outside of the classroom, and then coming to the classroom to get feedback, to, kind of gain some new understanding of some of the new methods that you're going to be putting into practice outside of the classroom, and some of the work that you're going to be doing. As far as tuition, so tuition for the upcoming cohort is $16,000. Application fee is $50 for those of you who have already kind of looked into that. And as you can see here, we have a bit of like a plan that we ask folks to commit to at the beginning of the program. When they commit, there's $1,000 commit due at the commit deadline, and then the following payments are split over the first quarter and the second quarter. But as we mentioned here, we're happy to work with students on alternative payment plans. So if you have worries about this or fears, please contact us. We will have a conversation about kind of what works best for you. I'm just going to move through this quickly because I want to make sure that we get through everything any questions we have. A bit about the curriculum. So all of this is up on the website. I don't want to be redundant if folks have seen this before, but I do want to just kind of like give a bit of an overview of what the actual 9 months will look like. The first quarter is going to be very much focused on research and sense making, and you're getting into a little bit of like the public sector innovation and impact. Studio is that course that you have on Saturdays. So a lot of that is really, again, focused on kind of putting into practice a lot of what you're learning during the week, and then building it in that day-long class that you have on the weekend. And that follows, kind of every quarter. The next quarter, and I guess what I would say, like generally about the curriculum here, is that it is kind of following the way that you would conduct design research or conduct design, kind of end to end when you're building a product or a service. And so the first portion of this is kind of that discovery, that research. The second quarter is really focused on like building something after you've learned about that problem that you're interested in. And then the second portion is like, okay, we figure out what we want to build, and then how are we actually going to work to implement that. So you're getting into things like business design. And then the final quarter is really focused on like, what are you going to be able to carry into whatever you're doing afterwards. So you're getting into building out a portfolio, professional practices, creative leadership that will allow you to then go on and apply to jobs. And I will also point out, if you notice the dates here, there is a couple breaks throughout the program. So you will have a couple week-long breaks where you can just kind of pause, hit reset, because as you've heard this evening, it can be intense. There's a reason we call it intensive. So you have that time to kind of breathe. You do sometimes have some work to do over that time, but the idea is that it's just an opportunity to reset after a long quarter. And then in terms of the application, so there's kind of three main parts of the application as it exists right now. There is a resume, which hopefully folks have, a statement of purpose, so kind of why you want to join the program, and then a portfolio. So this is where a lot of people freak out. I freaked out. I do not come from a design background at all. I took one design class in college, and it was like kind of far away from my dorm room, and I freaked out, and I was like, that's not for me. And then I went a completely different route in my career and had nothing to show. So I listed a couple of things here in terms of like what accounts for a portfolio, what applies for a portfolio. This could be design work. So I know a couple of folks mentioned that they have a background in graphic design. That can definitely be a part of what you include here. This could be other creative or visual work. These could be things that folks have done if you come from like a marketing background, an arts background. So that could be writing. It could be, I was an English major, so writing was something that I included in mine. And I will say writing is something that I do quite a bit in my work right now. Applied research. So anything that you've done that you have taken some sort of insights from folks and then built something using that. And that doesn't have to be something formal that you've done for your job even necessarily. It could be something outside of work. It could be something within work. Business or marketing work, already kind of touched on that a little bit, but making sure that you're building something that meets the needs of the business or marketing, whatever, a product or something. And then software and code. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of overlap between design and software. And so if you have that background and want to include that in your portfolio, definitely include that. And this is not an extensive list, a complete list. So if you have other things that you're like, oh, but this isn't listed here and maybe it could apply, please reach out to us at admissions. We'd love to talk to you about like what flies in terms of a portfolio and what it actually might look like. Mine was on a Word document. It doesn't need to be like something that is beautifully made and coded or anything like that. It just needs to communicate kind of a little bit of how you think and why you want to join this program, and how kind of your past experiences would lend themselves to preparing you for this kind of thing. A couple important dates. Again, these are things that you can find on the website, but our early application deadline is August 1st. We have admissions going out August 30th, and then would like to have folks to commit by August 31st. And then our regular application deadline is September 15th. So there's that. I saw a number of questions coming into the chat, so
I'll go ahead. And
I'm gonna pause here.
Yeah, great job. And I'll just knowing it's hard I can barely chew gum and walk at the same time. So I'll take it up on the questions. So I'll get some of the pragmatics out of the way. One was about how do you afford this in scholarships? So this is the first year where we're gonna be formally offering scholarships, but we're actively trying to nail down the specifics around how much funding we're gonna be able to get for that. And so our target is to have level of scholarships solidified by the time when regular applications are due. So that's September 15th. And we'll then be emailing out folks about kind of the application process there. But the details about at least the scholarship application interview and eligibility requirements will be posted soon, and we'll be sending out a message when that happens. There was also a question about just overall costs and how you can afford this. I think it ranges from full-time to part-time work, taking out traditional loans, taking out non-traditional loans, parents and family. I have a friend who calls that the bank of shame, but I guess depending on your relationship with your family members. But yeah, it's definitely not, like any educational program, it's not, there's a cost associated with it, and there's a variety of ways that the different folks have made it work, and we're trying to find ways to make that more accessible for folks this year, which hence the scholarship. I'm just trying to knock out some of the more pragmatic questions before I turn some of this over to back to the panelists. Okay, so class size. So right now, cohorts are no larger than 15. I'm only pausing there. There's some sort of larger conversation around if we do have more than 15 students, it would require sort of a revamp of adding a second kind of layer of instructors. And so right now the plan is not to have more than 15 students. Our sweet spot typically is around 12. And we don't admit students who we don't think will be successful in the program. And so, but that in terms of cohort size, that's what you can be thinking about. We want to try to keep it intimate with the instructors and professors. And then in terms of most projects within a cohort, or most assignments, to use a traditional education word, are group-based. And so groups will be between 2 and 3 folks per group. And so you're looking at between 3 and 5 teams within any specific cohort. And those teams tend to evolve over the course of a year in terms of the folks that you're working with. Sarah, any other hyper pragmatic ones before we turn some of these over to Sarah or Mary Hannah before we turn? Oh, and if you have any questions around tuition or any of the things we talked about today, you can email admissions@ac4d.com. We can get back to you.
There was one question about like the kinds of roles that students are prepared for after. I think that's both, that's kind of pragmatic, but also I think is something that can maybe be answered by some of the panelists if they're open to it.
Yeah, let's ping that to the panelists. What types of roles does AC4D prepare you for?
We can all jump in because Willie and we're all going to have similar answers, but any interaction design roles, service design roles, UX design roles, design direction, design strategy, even being an entrepreneur, looking for problems and solving them and coming up with your own business that makes an offering that solves that problem. So anything that you see that's listed as, interaction design, service design, UX design, design strategy are kind of the corporate job listings. That's what I would, that's what I see the most as AC4D roles.
Yeah, I think also to build on that, like in something that Cali said earlier, is like it really also prepares you for any industry. Like I went into consulting in enterprise software at a enterprise software firm. Like that's what I did. I was a designer there. That was my first role out of AC4D, and I felt most of my success in that was because of not necessarily that AC4D prepared me to go build enterprise software in a consulting role, but they taught me how to be curious about every problem that was laid before me in a way that I could then apply the skills to solve something outside of that. So I think it's really like, what do you want to go after when you leave the program? I think that's something also that you should be asking yourself as you go through that, is what am I interested in doing? What do I want that outcome to look like? I had a very clear vision of that when I went into AC4D, and I think, used my time there to really hone those skills and also, plot that trajectory for myself, because I knew where I wanted to land. And you have, I think, the ability to do that with a lot of really smart people around you to help you kind of get where you want to go when you're in that process.
Along those lines, there's a question about how does AC4D help connect you to jobs after graduation? That has been something that in the past, it's been a relatively informal process. And so while I think everyone on this call and our alumni would say the AC4D network is one of the strengths of the program, historically, we have not always been great at helping folks land that first job in a way that tries to minimize stress. So for some folks that has been challenging. I think looking at our numbers, like everybody does find that first job and ends up excelling and thriving in their career and realizes that they probably worried about it and stressed about it way more than they should have. But all that to say, for this year, we're looking at putting in some lightweight support for students in terms of portfolio critique and just providing some accountability to getting your name out there and applying for jobs, because a lot of it is just repetition. A lot of it is just a numbers game in terms of trying to get your foot in as many doors as possible, and also getting feedback around how you're positioning and portraying yourself, which we're working to formalize a little bit more. That type of support and resources was always available, but frankly, we could have and will do a better job of that moving forward. But I do want to be explicit, compared to other programs that guarantee a job or job placement, we're not that. I can go on a long tangent about the tactics and what actually it means when people say that for a lot of these different programs, but this is not a job 100% guaranteed situation. This is a supportive and warm community guaranteed that will do everything they can to support you. Willie, go ahead.
I just want to build on what you said to that, because my first job out of AC4D had no connection to the AC4D community. Like, it was not through someone else who was working there. I actually moved to a different country with my first job out of AC4D, but I will say that one of the things that got me in the door was the person who looked at my resume, saw that I'd gone to AC4D, and they knew like the level of like rigor and understanding that AC4D students come out of the school with. And that, like, they specifically said to me in my interviews, we interviewed because we knew you came from AC4D. So you may not get a job through someone who actually went to AC4D, but that name and the, I guess, the background or people's understanding
brand,
of it,
whatever,
brand that comes along with that is very helpful in getting those conversations started, at least in my personal experience. So,
scrolling through questions, anything else, Sarah, that's popping out to you, or other? I guess everyone has access to these questions, so panelists too, feel free to jump in.
So I attempted to answer this question before, but would be curious for the panel to jump in. There was a question around who is the ideal student for this program.
I think that's a hard question because it's really anyone who's interested in like growing. Like you don't have to come from a specific education background. There were people in our program who had not gone to formal higher education. There were people from government backgrounds. There was our friend, like he was in my cohort with Cali, but like he worked on Wall Street trading stocks. Like that's where he came from. And I don't think there's like necessarily an ideal background, but if you're coming to the table, you have to be just like being curious, wanting to solve real problems that face people and like being empathetic to people who are not like you, and being willing to like put in the time and effort to understand really like kind of the world outside of like your own lens of how things work. Like, and if you can do that, I think you can be successful at AC4D.
No, Willie, thank you for saying that, because that kind of inspired an answer in me that I think the ideal student is someone who does intrinsically care about improving the world. Like you do need to want to improve the circumstances and conditions of those around you. And for some people, that looks like someone who's interested in inclusion and equity. For some people, it's accessibility. For some people, it's environmentalism. For some people, it's just improving the general flow of, the way an airport works, or the way that an app works, or the way that a business works. But, there is a strong core value of improving, leaving things better than how you found them. That I think you have to be motivated by that internally to do this kind of work.
Yeah, it's a question that we've tried to put our hands on as an operating team, because to Willie's point, there's like, if you look at people's like on paper background, it's kind of all over the place.
Right.
But when you hang out with us as a group, there is this like weird, like familial connection and vibe where I think people do share a really same spirit. And I think it's, to Callie's point, it's a general concern for other humans, which I think not only translates to the work, but how we then choose to relate to one another as alumni moving forward with the world. I think the other thing is just like a willingness to do something really hard and a little weird, like they're like knowing that it's going to be hard and knowing that it's going to change you, and still like saying this is something that I'm up for. Is, I think it's that sort of weird or that specific chutzpah of like personality that I think in many ways is the secret sauce or the glue that sort of connects us or binds us, even though like the way that manifests itself in the world or in skills or and even in disposition can be very different. Because it's like, and maybe this is just rose tinted glasses, but it's like the affinity that we have for one another when we hang out in groups is like odd, especially given the kind of randomness of like the types of folks who have been in the program, and even the fact that like many people don't know one another that well, but you still feel a kinship with one another. Looking at questions.
Question about the projects that you are working on. There was a question around if you're assigned projects or if you choose what you'd like to work on.
Yeah, so that varies a little bit from year to year. It's usually a little bit of both, though. We're still trying to nail down the mix of assigned sort of projects or like topics versus ones that you graph towards. I will say though that for the studio, so the way that the course is structured is pretty early on. Usually within Q2, Q3, you're going to start sort of a project that will kind of maintain itself and evolve over the course of the entire program. And that is one where the team of students within the cohort aligns around a specific topic or research. But yeah, within the other classes, sometimes some are more open than others. Going through questions, this is remote, or excuse me, this is in person. One of the caveats there is one of the benefits of the program is that they're all taught by design leaders. However, that does mean that occasionally there will be classes held remotely. But we believe that one of the benefits of the program is the experience of engaging with fellow students and instructors in real life. And so, so right now, the program is in person. And I say right now, who knows what the future will entail, and who knows how many more global pandemics are in front of us. But yeah, right now the program is in person. Going through questions. Any other ones that pop out to you all before we sign off?
I think we've covered a lot of them, but I know that there was a lot listed here, so I just want to be clear that like if there's anything that we didn't get to, please.
Length of statement of purpose and portfolio, no length requirements. So anecdotally, they range from 1 to 3 or 4 pages. Writing more doesn't get you additional points for statement of purpose. Any other panelists before we sign off? Any other parting words of wisdom? I know Anna had to drop early. That's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd offer myself as, if folks have other questions about, about this, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's fine. And I think a lot of the questions around like what kind of design are worth answering in more depth, because AC4D deepens what your understanding of design is. So it really is, it's worth kind of exploring. And I think the AC4D website has a lot of resources about that, but I think that's probably worth digging into more if folks want to reach out to. I'll volunteer Jonathan and Sarah for that, but I also will take questions too. But yeah, thank you for all of this, and I'm excited that all of you are interested.
Yeah, same.
Go ahead, Willie.
I'll echo what Cali said. I'm pointing that way because she's off to that side of my screen. But if y'all do have extra questions or there's other things you want to know about, feel free to reach out through LinkedIn. My own personal opinion, if you're curious about what type of design to look for, there is a book called About Face by Alan Cooper. It is the thing that I read that inspired me to attend AC4D. It is very dense, but it is very expansive on what is human-centered design, why it's important, how it looks across not only websites, but services as a whole. And it's a really wonderful book. I'll throw that in the chat here in a little bit, but it's a wonderful kind of opening to what is human-centered design and how it kind of works if you're looking for a more in-depth understanding of that. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, go ahead, Kelly. Are you going to say something too, Kelly, or no? That is applauding. Cool. All right. Well, thank panelists and attendees. Thank you so much. Early applications, as Sarah mentioned, are due August 1st. There was a question around benefits of applying early. That's namely peace of mind and essentially getting a spot solidified for AC4D sooner rather than later. And so, so basically early applicants given our requirements, and then that is a spot that is yours and cannot be taken from a regular applicant. So that is the benefit. All right. So email us admissions at Austin Center for Design or admissions at AC4D, both work. And we'll either answer the question for you directly or connect you with an alumni who can give you better perspective. Sarah, anything else before we sign off?
No, that's it. Thank you all
Great.
so much for joining.
All right, thank you all. Talk soon.